G'day legends, I hope that you are having a fantastic day and so far a great week. Now, thank you for all the support in the last couple of videos. Now, if you want to come and join the conversation more, feel free to jump onto the Telegram or Willie's PMC as we call it. Anyway, legends, we have a fair bit to go over today. Now, we're going to look over more intel sent about these next generation aircraft that yesterday we speculated with some information coming out that these may be in the air and that this is the reason why we are seeing this increase in Russian ISR deep into Ukraine, well, surveillance especially, and then that allowing further of those strikes. And we're talking tens and tens up to 100 kilometers in that we haven't really seen for a long time. There's definitely been a difference there, and a lot of people have been in my inbox about this sort of thing. Now, of course, we're going to have a look at the maps. We're going to talk about Mr. Trump and Mr. Orban's conversation, their meeting, what came out of that. We're going to look at shell shortages. We're going to look at some footage, and we're going to talk about what Zelensky has said about the Russian recent advances either. Now, I will apologize. The title of this, like all my YouTube stuff, but just YouTube in general, is probably a little bit clickbaity about the imminent collapse of the entire front line. But this is something that we've been hearing since the absolute beginning of the war, is that the front line is about to collapse. And whether you listen to pro-Ukrainian or pro-Russian channels or Twitter or just the mainstream media, depending on if it's Western or Russian or whatever, this has been a common theme, that the front line's about to collapse, that when the Leopards get there, it's going to collapse. When the T-90s get there, it's going to collapse. And all that, you know, Russia's out of weapons and that Ukraine's getting all this funding. And what I'm here to say is neither side is about to collapse. In many regards, or most regards, both Ukraine and Russia are actually more powerful when they began. Now, I'm going to break this down because I think some people really believed that at one point Russia was fighting with shovels, and now we see the complete swing of that. And some people really did believe that there were no Ukrainians left to fight and that the foreign aid has completely dried up. And I'm here to say that we're actually further from that than we were day one, that both sides are more powerful than before the war, especially Ukraine. Ukraine is significantly more heavily armed and, of course, a lot closer ties with their allies in the West. Both Russia and Ukraine have recruited more men massively. Both have strengthened ties with their allies. They've built up massive, unbelievable defenses within Ukraine. And I think mostly that both have improved their processes and their tactics dramatically. Of what we've seen as far as the operating procedures in the beginning of this, the process of how this is all used and used together for both Russia and Ukraine have increased a lot in this war. And that's why we're seeing less successes in a lot of areas, or actually better attacks, but they're not having as much success, if that made sense. Both are learning from this war quickly, but that the defensive works build up is huge, and that Russia has switched its economy more so, will continue to switching, and we're going to talk about this, into more of a wartime economy. So is one side about to just completely collapse like our titles on YouTube have been telling us now for a couple of years across these channels? No. Russia's not out of men. Ukraine's not out of men. Neither side's out of weapons. Both sides have allies, and both are making a lot of stuff, whether it's the West making it, sending it into Ukraine, or Russia making it at home in domestic produce and sending it in. This is one of the issues of why this war will continue for a long time. Neither side is absolutely on their last legs. Now, there are pieces we can point to as far as if the US pulls funding, but the EU is still massive. There's still a lot of countries there. Will it have a big effect? Yes. If Russia loses other things like the A-50s, will it have an effect? Yes. But as far as imminent, complete collapse, no. We may see complete collapses, imminent collapses of small areas, but as both sides have just dug in these unbelievably huge defensive works, however this front line moves, whether north or south, east or west, the casualties are going to be huge, but also in defense that you can use a lot less manpower and systems there too. I've said before, and I'll say again, by the end of the war, if Ukraine and or Russia achieve their goals, whatever those goals and where those goalposts may sit by the end of this war, we will have well over 1 million people killed. just because of where the defenses are and the lofty goals that both have actually set. So that's just my little rant done. Now, we are going to talk more about these aircraft, and we'll go over of pretty much what I then said yesterday in these and some more newer stuff that I have been sent across. So let's look basically at what we talked about yesterday. If you haven't watched that video, I actually reckon it's one of my best ones. You should go and watch it. But this is, of course, Russia's Su-57. They're claimed Gen 5 or maybe Gen 4 plus, reduced radar cross-section, so claimed stealth, but with any stealth, it's like a silencer on a weapon. That's a suppressor. All that stealth technology does, whether it's a Su-57, a F-117, F-22, and F-35, it reduces the radar cross-section. There's always some. A bloody bird has some. My head has some. But it just reduces that down. Now, this is their newer fighter. There is another one apparently in the works beyond this, the Su-75, but we won't bother with that one as we haven't ever seen this one actually put into proper, like, full combat use. But of course, we're talking about this, the S-70 drone that is used to work in tandem with these aircraft, up to 4 of these drones with one aircraft. Now, what does this do? Well, it just allows the aircraft to have more sensors available to it. So it's just like Australia calls our version this a wingman, and that's probably a good name. That is a wingman, that this can carry a weapon for you, so it's not in your belly of your jet, and more sensors, so you may not have that aboard your jet, increasing your performance, your range, and of course, reducing your individual signature on the ground. And of course, stealth aircraft, their biggest issue with bombs is they have to be carried within the belly of the plane. So as soon as those bellies open, radar cross-section, of course, skyrockets. But if you have underslung on your pillars bombs, that basically takes away your ability to be stealth anyway. So you can have another however many missiles in the belly of these, and there's been a lot of speculation that these have been used. We tracked down some articles from 2018, 2019, that 2024 was the period these were going to come in, and we got a little bit of information here. It's been reported that 2 Sukhoi S-70 drones are currently undergoing a weapons testing phase and have been deployed in the Donbass region over the past month. Local residents near Donetsk can observe these compact jets taking off from a nearby airfield. The Armed Forces of Ukraine have already received photos of these drones. Additionally, Russia has introduced an enhanced, fast and weaponized version of the drone. The S-70 raises significant concerns due to its reported radar and thermal camouflage tech, so reduced just in the air, rendering it nearly invisible until its direct line of sight upon approach. So as it sees the target, of course, those bellies will open and you can actually physically see them in the air. And what we have talked about is these have been spotted recently on a Russian airfield, fairly close to Ukraine, along with Su-57 aircraft that they are to be working with. Now, one thing I will talk about is we have seen 2 Russian A-50 aircraft, some of Russia's, if not Russia's, most important aircraft. Of course, these are AWACS. These are control of the sky. These move equipment around as far as supply more intelligence and information gathering and work with the fighter aircraft in the air, say for the Su-34s that we see working, dropping the glide bombs. Now, 2 of those were shot down. Whether one is said to be friendly fire, but either way, 2 are gone. These are very important. And I have heard that maybe the Su-57 is actually covering some of these AWACS roles. This is off a friend of mine, good guy, on Telegram. I can't say who any of these people are, but there are reports that Su-57s are covering for A-50 for some intel ops. The S-70 definitely has some new sensors as well. So this is really where we see these generation aircraft come. What changes between gen to gen or new generation aircraft? And Gen 5 aircraft, they're basically just a big computer, and they have a decreased reliance on force multiplication systems like AWACS. Your older Gen 3, Gen 4 aircraft, they have a limited amount of sensors on them, and it's really important to have something like an AWACS in the sky to send more information, collect and send into those systems. And as we advance through that, there was always a spot for something like an AWACS. Of course, their radar is going to be bigger than anything you can fit in F-35, but it does have a decreased reliance on that and can collect information in these Gen 5 aircraft or 4+ aircraft and send it back out to other systems, not only airborne, but ground-borne as well. So the Gen 5 decreases that and can take over some of that. And my contact is saying that with those A-50s, big, heavy, slow things shot down, that maybe these newer generation aircraft are actually picking up some of the slack that has been left since those have been taken down. Now, we're going to go over more that I have been sent as well, just about a little bit of this system, a little bit more of everything. So, of course, these people have to stay anonymous too. But hey, Matty, interesting discussion about the S-70 in your latest video. For whatever it's worth, I still think the HIMARS was probably taken out by some kind of satellite-guided munition from a distance, and a Tornado S strike sounds perfectly plausible. The fact that it was out of order, according to your source, makes it likely in my view. So it was broken down. I've heard that from a few people who are reliable. I mean, for the first time, we get clear evidence of a hit on a HIMARS. It's a static one. This doesn't scream new weapons platform to me, but it is very interesting that the Russians managed to put out an observation drone so far behind the front line and did the same thing for the Patriot hit, indicating this wasn't a fluke. Now, this is tying in that there may be some new system in the air. One thing I think he missed here is that we actually got two angles of some of that too. So there are multiple in the air, very deep behind, very good quality footage as well. In fact, even assuming the S-70 is operational for anticipating for when it will be, I'm not at all convinced the Russians will want to use it over contested airspace like Ukraine. It may be unmanned, but it's still heavy, complex, expensive system that's unlikely to be easy to make in large quantities. Now, I think he brings up a really good point here, and this is very similar to what we saw the head of Rostec, I think it was, about the T-14 Armada tank, that they are very expensive, hard to make, and can make large quantities of others. And that's why they're focusing on the T-90. Of course, this much more so than that, but it fits the same narrative, let alone at a reasonable price. I don't see it as an attritable asset, so something you can actually lose. Besides, it's likely more or less the best Russia can do in terms of stealth. So is it worth risking Ukrainian and NATO intelligence getting their hands on it over what exactly? I can't really think of targets that this drone could hit that other Russian weapons could not. So why would you be using this system, not something else, and the massive threat of losing one of these as well, especially when those bomb bay doors open? If it was struck by that, of course, your radar, you're going to light up everything in a contested space. Anyway, and that would be worth the risk. In my opinion, HIMARS systems aren't valuable enough, including pure monetary terms, that these aren't a big enough system to risk something like this. Supposedly around $4 million for a system, that's certainly much less than the S-70. Maybe Patriots would be, but they'd also be the ideal system to detect and destroy the drone. Plus, they're a lot less mobile than HIMARS, so other options would often be available. So he's throwing a little bit of maybe this wasn't something else, but does talk about the observation is very interesting. Is there something else in the air? And is it worth having these in for these other systems? That a Patriot, yeah, it's probably worth it because we are seeing the Patriots be very, very successful, but it's also the exact system that these are made to then hit out of the sky. In my view, the drone was designed for a potential confrontation with NATO. This is talking about the S-70 and won't be risked against Ukraine. Of course, it should have a pretty small radar cross-section, but that wouldn't make it impossible to take out, just harder. And since it's designed to carry weapons internally, it's unlikely to be able to shoot anything with much range. So it'd have to be right on top of its target. Definitely not a great plan against Patriot systems. This, I'm unsure. Just because you got something internally doesn't mean that you can't get a lot of range. You can still get a lot of range in this. Yes, less than some external systems, but you will still get fairly decent range. But yes, you are probably going to be well within range of a Patriot hit to hit. You're not going to have that massive gap and a standoff as well. That being said, I'd be surprised if the Russians were not working on some kind of lighter, cheaper, attritable drone with good range, a laser designator, and laser-guided bombs. Basically a heavier Orlan-30 with its own weapons, or a Russian TB2, so a version of the Bayraktar that we've seen Ukraine use. But if you will, but even that only makes sense if you think you have a decent chance to evade air defenses. The Bayraktar is estimated to cost $5 to $6 million, which is why we haven't seen much of the systems, at least since Russian air defense operators got their stuff together. So, of course, the Bayraktar in the beginning of the Ukrainian war, the war in 2022, we have seen that. We even had songs. There's a song called Bayraktar taking out Russian systems very successfully. Now we just don't see it, because it does seem like the Russian AD, the air defense, has worked out how to hit these, and they are very, very expensive. Using a $5-6 million system, a massive threat to that system is not worth going after one tank. We're going to talk about the arms race that we are seeing in this war in a second. But then contacting this. However, if we're looking for game changers, and there haven't been that many in this war, certainly fewer than propagandists on both sides claimed at various points. Everyone has claimed different game changers, and there's no such thing as a Wunderwaffen. The game changer in this war would be, the biggest game changer in this war would be air superiority. If Russia can gain air superiority and they can fly their large, heavy bombers into Ukraine and carpet bomb things, striking fields, that would be a huge game changer. If Ukraine can do it, if the F-16s can get air superiority, and of course that means that they would have to be allowed to strike within Russia. They'd have to be able to strike within Russia to actually get the seed and deed missions to get air superiority. But if they could get it, that would be just as big of a game changer as well. But he says, I think gliding fabs are it. I'm no professor of air power, but I believe that Justin Bronk is too dismissive of them. So saying how effective these actually are. He says there's nothing that can hit that another existing Russian weapons could not. And technically he's right, of course, but they're hitting a lot of things other weapons would not, simply because there weren't enough of them. So one thing we're seeing is that that Russian weapons can able to hit what the fabs are hitting, but they're significantly more expensive to use. And there's always is this idea with weapons that you're going to use this multi-million-dollar missile against this building. Probably not. Where a fab does really navigate around a lot of these issues, and because you don't have enough, they're too hard to make. And we've heard from Western sources that Russia basically has enough fabs just to bloody throw around. And we've seen from the footage that these are getting more and more accurate. They are looking very accurate. You can see them land in a linear line on a road. But who would want to spend an Iskander missile on a trench and a couple of concrete shelters when there are so many of them? So it doesn't make financial sense, and so few Iskanders. But there are apparently enough fabs for fab strikes to make a sense against such fortifications, and evidently they're pretty effective. They're no silver bullets, but they do seem to work, which means it's much harder for Ukraine to stop Russian advances on areas they choose to focus on. And I think this makes a very big difference. Time will tell whether I'm right. And I think recently the biggest change on the front line we have seen is the use of those fabs, that they can strike hundreds of them in an area, and that the fabs, they're not really worth hitting the fab either. There's so many of them and they're so cheap that it's not really worth hitting them. You try and hit the jets, but the jets are way back. They're out to 60 kilometers back, launch them off, that your actual window to intercept one of these jets is very, very short, that there is a huge increase with them. I think the F-16s may help with that, but it's going to depend in where they are and the effectiveness once they actually lay on the ground, those F-16s, and lay onto the battlefield and see exactly how this works and how effective they are. We are unsure, but we're going to talk about the new arms race after we look at a little bit of air footage. We're talking about air stuff. So Ukrainian air defense here does successfully engage a Russian Shahed drone. Interesting footage here. We can see it tracking, and you'll see the interceptor come top down and successfully then takes this out. Again, we get footage of everything on this battlefield. If something isn't filmed, I'm telling you, if it doesn't come out in a few days, it didn't happen. I think you know what I'm referring to. We also have footage here we talked about a MiG-29 was taken down on March the 8th, I believe, and the young pilot sadly has lost his life. This was a Ukrainian MiG-29. Now, this is said to be taken out by a Russian Su-35 with an R-37 Mike missile, although there are claims that it was friendly fire. I shouldn't say they took it down. Either way, it is one plane down. So you'll see where we're talking here in a second. Then we see the hit here. So you can see the plane just here. We sort of lose it behind the B pillar on this car. And then we do see then the strike on that MiG-29, and that it has then gone down. And planes are incredibly important in this war. Now, we have seen that the Ukrainian Air Force commander has said that they have located a Russian command and control ship and have taken it out with strikes here as well. Now, where exactly this was, it's unknown. I've heard claims of a lot of areas, but we are unsure exactly where this was, but said that they've hit then a command and control ship. of course, using as a bit of a spy ship. It's not uncommon to use more civilian-looking ships for this. But let's talk about this new arms race. Now, it does seem that there has been a real shift and a learning curve in this war, away from the normal building up technology arms race to just how many cheap drones can you make, how many cheap shells can you make, like how much stuff can you actually have, how much manpower to fight, which is funny because this is what we saw in wars of the past and it's what we're seeing in a modern war like this. And this is something I've spoken at length about. I think the West still, but especially in years gone by, is far too concerned with advancing technology rather than just having enough stuff. Now, developing R&D technology, that helps pay dividends better to shareholders. This is what you get in a system like we have set up. And I talk a little bit about that, but let's just have a look at, so I've got a really itchy mustache. Let's just have a look at what then CNN has released about shells. Now, one thing we need to say with CNN is, of course, CNN is a very, very progressive, left-leaning typically, and on that side tend to have a lot more pro-Ukraine bias, but we will share this and we go over it. I'm not saying that take everything as correct, but I'm saying we need to know where these biases are and then put things together, just like the maps. Anyway, that CNN says Russia appears to be on track to produce nearly 3 times more artillery munitions than the US and Europe, a key advantage of what expected to be another Russian offensive in Ukraine later this year. This is only released today. Russia is producing 250,000 artillery shells per month, or 3 million a year. Collectively, the US and Europe have the capacity to generate only about 1.2 million munitions annually to send to Kyiv. So much less, although we are trying to increase this dramatically. The US military set a goal to produce 100,000 rounds of artillery a month by the end of 2025. So still almost 2 years away, but this is less than half the Russian monthly output. Many will say, yeah, but these shells are not as good. Yes, but with shells, it does seem like if this war has shown us one thing, is quantity over quality is the rule accepted here. Yes, a 155 is better than 122. Yeah, it is. In range, in accuracy, in whatever else you want to have. But if you're talking 3 to 1, 4 to 1, 5 to 1, 10 to 1, the front line where things are moving doesn't lie. But, and even that number is now out of reach with the 60 billion in Ukraine funding stalled by Congress. So that money, of course, there's going to be a big indicator for where the war then goes. A senior NATO official told them, what we're in now is a production war. The outcome in Ukraine depends on how each side is equipped to conduct the war. Officials say Russia is currently firing 10,000 shells a day compared to the 2,000 a day from the Ukrainian side. So the ratio of 5 to 1, and the ratio is worse in some places along the 1,000-kilometre or 600-mile front line. Ukraine is struggling not only with ammunition, but also growing manpower shortages on the front line. So we do know that casualties are high. We've got a number from Zelensky. We've got a number from the Russian MOD. But either of those numbers correct? Probably not. But we know that Russia has a manpower issue, which points to problems in some of those numbers. But we also know that ammunition is a huge problem as well, and production of ammunition is very difficult and very, very expensive out in the West, while the West is looking to buy shells from non-NATO countries and rebuy back shells from Arab countries as well. So there's a real problem with shells, and to be honest, NATO is incredibly lucky in one sense that we actually found this issue in a more localized war, like a war just between two countries as Russia and Ukraine. Imagine if we had a full-scale, all-out war that Russia and China and other countries were involved in. We would have found out about these shells. We found out probably too little too late anyway, but thank God it's not like this hot, larger war, and we would have been out in the first few months. Now, the US and its allies have given Ukraine a number of highly sophisticated systems, including the Abrams, tank, and F-16s. Well, F-16s coming in, but military analysts say the war will likely be won or lost based on who fires the most artillery shells. Now, of course, there is a finite amount of money, and these systems cost a lot where they may have been spent on shells. I've seen a lot of people talk about specifically this, that these very, very expensive systems that need a lot of people, was that money better off spent in shells? I guess we will see. A NATO official has said the number one issue that we're watching right now is the munitions. It's those artillery shells, because that's where the Russian really is mounting a significant production advantage and mounting a significant advantage on the battlefield. Of course, we've seen the Russian economy shift over to more wartime, and a friend of mine who's right into the financial space as a job has spoken that if in 5 to 7 years that Russia will be able to switch that more, and it will be very powerful. And that actually lines up with the Lithuanian intelligence that they put as a long-term, or whatever their scale was, but more that 7 to 10 years, that's when their economy will be fully shifted into that space, maybe. But we are seeing that shift, that 24/7 rotating shifts doing this. And also, of course, Iran sending 300,000 artillery shells last year, probably more, the official has said, and North Korea supplying just under 7,000 containers of ammunition, carrying 1 million shells. So a hell of a lot from there. And again, North Korea is a dictator country, basically a slave country, but can build a lot of these cheap, dumb weapon systems. Russia's put everything they have in the game. Their war machine works in full gear, and we don't know exactly how much support that Russia is getting from China, whether directly from China or into North Korea, and then from North Korea into Russia as well, because we do know that North Korea basically works as a slave state for China. Now, a rough equivalent of the US President Joe Biden invoked the Defense Production Act. Of course, this gives the power to order companies to produce equipment as well. So they have to produce it for the military, very similar to the Holden, which was an Australian car brand, but any Aussie will know a Holden. The Holden factory in Adelaide, massive car factory, that had procedures in place that if Australia enacted like a wartime thing like this, that they would be able to retool and then start making and fixing tanks. Now, as well, there's actually a dog food factory. This is all now gone, because things have changed in this area, so I can talk about it. But there's a dog food factory that was down the road from one of the bases here that had procedures in place to pull apart machines, sanitize the machines, and within 24 hours could make human-grade food. Now, I think the human-grade food would have been pretty much sanitized dog food, but for wartime, those were in place. And countries have things like that in place. Switzerland is a perfect example of this. Anyway, Lieutenant General Stephen Busham has said if you can actually control the economy, then you can probably move a little bit faster than other countries out there. So, of course, Russia, they control the economy. What happens? More state-owned than sort of a free capitalist system. But you can control just, shells, bang, go from there. But he has said the West will have more sustaining power, so it can last and outlast for longer, and saying that the West is starting to ramp up building infrastructure for the munitions. Anyway, European lawmaker said Russia's output 24/7, huge, immense. We should not underestimate their will to outlast us with patience and resilience. And this is going against, like what I said right in the beginning about this imminent collapse of these systems, and there's 4 missiles left. There was even counters at one point saying they're out of these, and 2 years and we're still seeing them. That underestimating your enemy is the biggest mistake that you can make. Intelligence officials believe that neither side is poised to make huge gains imminently. Ties back, but the overall math favours Moscow in the long run, particularly if US aid does not materialise, especially if US aid does not materialise. How's that going to look into the elections at the end of the year, which we were about to speak about? But it's not going well, but it all depends. So this was one source familiar. If aid restarts and comes quick, not all is lost. So the war, what's happening, it is very much, up in the air, right now. Now, this all ties together, so we'll get to the maps in a second. But Zelensky has said this with, I believe it was the French radio. I could be wrong, but French broadcaster BFM, that the Russian advance has been halted. Our command military has stopped the Russian advances in eastern Ukraine. Now, talking about Avdiivka, where about 20 kilometers was made by Russia within a couple of weeks westwards. Now, I can give you this fresh piece of information. The situation is now much better than during the past 3 months, and has expressed that they are in the process of building over 1,000 kilometres, 620 miles of fortifications. Of course, this has come under much scrutiny, because many people dating back into 2022 were saying this should have been done then, and now people now are saying it should have been started back then. When we told you to start it back then they're not built up enough. We may see more breakthroughs. We know these are getting very, very built up with your, what do people call them, like coat pyramids or whatever, which obviously work because both sides are using them anyway. When we talk about fortifications, we're talking about an ongoing process. We're not talking about a few kilometres or hundreds of kilometres, but more than 1,000 kilometres of constructions. It's a very complex task. They need to be solid, resistant to changes in climate, but also resistant to whatever military hardware is used against these defensive lines. Talking about Macron, where Macron has said that French soldiers could be deployed. As long as Ukraine holds, the French army can stay on French territory, saying that they don't need the soldiers, but nothing would be against soldiers coming in for training, as well as Poland has said as well only today that there's no law stating that NATO soldiers couldn't go in training rules. They're not breaking any laws in that, but something I'll say to that is not breaking a law, but you're also then opening yourself up to a strike as well. And I don't see any benefit of training Ukrainian soldiers within Ukraine, where it's going to have to be hidden and hush-hush and this and that. When you've got NATO countries that are that bloody close, it's a day drive from Kyiv to Romania or to Poland. It's 600 k's. It's like 400 miles. Take the troops out, train in complete open, using other facilities, whatever. I just don't get why training in Ukraine. I get it for like off the front line, refit training stuff, right down in these regions. But as far as training up, building up big force, I just don't see. Europe is very small. Take the guys out, complete safety, not hiding things, not opening up your own guys or them to strikes, and do that. I just don't see the obsession with that. I'm going to talk about Trump and, of course, Hungarian leader Viktor Orban here. And, of course, this is Trump, if you don't know what he looks like. But what Orban has said about Trump, he has a very clear vision, which is hard not to agree with. He says the following. First of all, he will not give a penny to the Ukraine-Russian war. This is why the war will end, because it is obvious that Ukraine cannot stand on its own feet. If the Americans do not give money, the Europeans alone will not be able to finance this war, and then the war is over. Now, there are some that will say this is incorrect, that the Europeans will be able to finance it. For a while, it will be a very big hit. Look at the funding to NATO, that it's well over half is still American, as same as the funding to Ukraine. It will be a huge hit. Can Europe do it? Potentially, but it will be a massive, massive hit if Russia do pull out that funding. And of course, we've heard that Trump has said that he wants to solve the war within 24 hours. And this is what Trump has said about Orban. There's nobody that's better, smarter or better leader than Viktor Orban. He's fantastic. He's a non-controversial figure. I wouldn't say that, because he says this is the way it's going to be. And that's the end of it, right? He's the boss. No, he's a great leader. So those two are obviously mates with, I guess, similar, from my outside looking in, maybe similar ideas about the war and where this is going. But we know that that is coming hard and fast into the latter half of this year. Now, of course, I've been delaying you for 30 bloody minutes. Willie, you prick. We want to have a look at the maps. Now, let's firstly go down into Avdiivka and have a look. Now, on this map, we're not seeing any changes around Avdiivka. We'll talk about the change near Novelski as well that we're seeing. But Tonenki, Olivka, Stapovi, right on the front line, first line of defense. We're not seeing any changes here. Let's look at what then Suryak has to say about this. Now, we're not really talking Avdiivka here. We're talking near Pervomayski, Novelski area. You're going to like something that matches up. But we do see that that does look like the Russians have crossed in between these two reservoirs here down into Pervomayski. More situation northwest of Donetsk City. During the last 3 days, Russian army reactivated the advances from the axis of Verdani, of course, in here, into the locality of Pervomayski from the north. As you can see, Russian forces are applying some same strategy applied several weeks ago in the southern part of the locality, which forced withdrawal of the Ukrainian army from the southern dashes. So applying in and down and trying to surround a little bit of that. Now, down to the south here, we see that Russia made an advancement up into this tree line here from Novelski north to Pervomayski, heading north there. And then this lines up with then this map here. This is Pervomayski, this is Novelski at this blue dot. So exact same push up into there. North Donetsk City, new updated, was added after confirmations. Russian army took control over the forest belt east of the settlement of Novelski. Exact same here. But then Suryak talks about what we're seeing in Avdiivka and why no changes. With respect to the Avdiivka front, Russian advances have been minimal. It should be noted that Ukrainian forces brought in reinforcements and launched a series of counterattacks that stopped the Russian advance. This is why I've seen those Abrams tanks used, and we know that Ukraine is throwing everything at it if we're seeing the Abrams used in those attacks. However, and despite what some reports say, the Ukrainian momentum has not completely weakened. Russian troops are advancing slowly thanks to heavy shelling of these localities, while reinforcements are beginning to arrive at the front in preparation for a future large-scale attack to take the first line of defense. Only after this achievement will it be possible to speak of the battle for Ossechuni. So we're speaking, of course, then Olivka, Tolnenki, and then the battle furthermore out into then the second line of defense and pushing further. So it will be interesting to see exactly how this rolls. But we are hearing Ukraine is deploying a lot of reserves in, but we're seeing that Russia is deploying reserves too, and are told that they are having a bit of a tactical halt to regroup and launch a new offensive, although it will be very, very slow moving forward through then built up lines of defense, and we'll get an idea of how built up these lines actually are. Now, let's have a look down in Mariinka here, and we do see that there's no like Russian big movements here, but one thing that we are seeing is that the grey zone has said to have shifted here, so there may be some change. And we have a Syriac on Mariinka just here showing fairly different. So of course this red dot down here, this is Pobeda, and then this red dot is Horivka here, so you can see where these two reservoirs add up, so saying that Russia has had a further advance. But Russian army continue increasing the buffer zone around Pobeda at the same time with troops to control the plantations located on the high ground which overlooks Herovka. So there is some high ground just on the north side here. I'll show you that at some point. Now, of course, what they're trying to do, advancing in Pobeda, is to try and capture then Novomyalivka from like a pincer movement again. Now, we're going to talk about Novomyalivka. Now, we don't see any change in here on this map, but we do have, from Ukrainian sources, geolocated footage just here at this factory here. Now, I can't show that footage because it is unbelievably gruesome. I'm not even going to put it on the Telegram. It's horrible stuff, but we do know 100% that Russian infantry are up into this area being targeted by FPV drones. So it's likely that it looks like this here, which is what then the Syriac map is basically showing. I'll show you that in a second, but that was a Ukrainian map that I just, that was a Ukrainian map that I just showed you showing the footage of the Russian guy being hit. But this is Novomyalivka here, and this is up here. So this red dot pretty much lines up with the factory here, and said that this factory is also under control, and right here is where that was hit. So it's basically saying that this looks more so like something like this through here, and that this is under control. We know that there was a Ukrainian confirmed strike against Russian infantry here. So again, a lot up in the air. It's probably very, very fluid here, but we're getting an idea of what is happening here. Now, we're going to push down to the south to see no change through here, although we do continue to see Russia deploy troops near Marfa, Pil, Huliapol here to try and draw Ukrainian forces away. Now, Robotny here, we don't see any change on the deep state map, but what we do know is that Russia has launched many, many assaults to try and get these defensive works back, and that through Robotny itself, it has been incredibly fluid over the past 2 weeks. Of Ukraine has taken, Russia has taken stuff back, Ukraine has then taken it back, Russia back and forward, and there's increased grey zone for sure through here. Now, map update today shows different story again. Now, of course, this red dot here, this is Robotny. So situations up front, Russian army managed to set foothold again inside Robotny after Ukrainian army withdrew during the previous hours. So it's hard to see. This is the road through here. So this is the road. So saying that it's somewhere like along in here, it's what it's saying, but in here we don't see the map change. So we'll wait out on that. But this is a very important area to regain for the Russians or hold for the Ukrainians. We're not exactly sure what here. Now, I've seen some other YouTubers claiming that there was a second bridgehead put down in the Kherson Oblast. I haven't seen anything on that. I personally, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I just missed it. I haven't seen any map movement. I haven't seen any geolocated footage. So I don't know where they're getting it, but I probably am wrong. Anyway, let's look at this footage of a Challenger 2 as well. Now, we know the Charlie 2 Abrams, they were built for different wars. They were built in different times. You know, these were very, very successful in hot desert environments. Big, heavy tanks. That these were built for more survivability. This is one of the big differences between a T-series and, say, Abrams, Leopards, not Leopards, Abrams and Charlies. Is the Abrams and Charlies, they're much bigger, heavier, more survivable tank. T-series, less survivable. T-series, significantly smaller, less armoured, lot lower. Because the idea behind the T-series was the T-series are going to be fighting on Europe territory, that Russia is going to be fighting either within Russia or out of Russia. That these, if they can lose one or two, put it on a flatbed, put it on a truck, put it on a train, and it will be within this. Where the Charlies and Abrams were built in lesser numbers, they had to be more survivable, because the idea that they're going to be fighting within the UK or within America is very unlikely that they're going to be fighting away. Therefore, you need more survivable tanks. That's why they are bigger and heavier. And of course, built in different times. Of course, T-Series built in different times had to be a lot lower because front-on weapons were more of the rage rather than what we're seeing now of top-down. But there is just a different design philosophy behind this. And that's why we see that these are bigger and heavier. And you can see here that then this Charlie does get bogged.
That the Ukrainian tank crews have given us since we got here is that whilst this Challenger is formidably precise, actually they've had real problems with it here in Ukraine because of its mobility, and they just said it's too heavy, it's underpowered, and it keeps getting stuck.
So this here, I don't know how many tanks that actually crossed this bloody puddle that they've driven into here, but you know, this guy is saying that they're having problems with them because they're so big, so heavy, underpowered that they keep getting stuck in the mud. Of course, built for different environments. And then they do some training, and then this one actually passes through. Very common to turn the turret back on this to get through hard ground, and then they pull it out. But there are problems with these bigger, heavier tanks. Look at tanks built for the different environments, and you see design differences. Now, one last thing from the MOD, that according to the Russian Interior Ministry, there are 2.8 million residents in temporary controlled territories. So the controlled territories of the purple and red through here, who now are Russian passport holders. Russia makes access to the services in these regions, including social services and healthcare, conditional on the receipt of the Russian passport. So to get social services, to get healthcare, whatever, you then need to get a Russian passport. Of course, that includes giving up your old one in April 23. And this is another step to try and legitimize those areas. In April 23, Russian President Putin issued a decree stating that residents of these areas who refuse Russian passports will become foreign citizens or stateless persons. Such persons have the right to live here, but only until 1st of July 2024, which is coming up. There's realistic possibility that the individuals in the TCT after this date who do not have Russian passports will be deported or face detention. Recent rhetoric from the Deputy Chair of Russia's National Security Council, Medvedev, indicates individuals may be deported to some remote parts of Russia. So not deported back into Ukraine, but deported into God knows where. It's illegal to make someone stateless, but the Kremlin is pursuing a relentless Russification policy in these territories. Another decree on military districts issued on the 26th of Feb 24 states TCT will now become part of the Russian Southern Military District. The Kremlin is seeking to make the integration of TCT into the Russian Federation irreversible. So they're trying to legitimize and make it very difficult to turn this back of these areas here. And something like in Crimea, what we see is not only this, but then we see them moving Russian residents. This is talking over the past 10 years, but moving Russian residents into these areas to make it more difficult again. And if Ukraine do manage to actually occupy and liberate Crimea, that's going to be a huge UN issue with the people living there as well. Now, legends, I'm sorry this one went long. I think I've covered everything. Have a great day. Look after yourselves. Thank you for all the recent support. That's it. Cheers. Bye-bye.